PhD weekly blog, week 28, I believe. So I've missed the last couple of weeks. One I announced on LinkedIn, the other I didn't, and I have been writing. So I've been working on my first copy of my confirmation document in time for the confirmation date, which is the 23rd of September. I got that off to my supervisor, Matteo, last week and got some feedback on Monday. So good feedback, very solid feedback, and no problems with the substance so much as the orientation of the substance. The main piece of feedback with all of this is that it needs to focus around the research question. So I now have a better understanding of exactly what the confirmation panel will be looking for specifically, which is to say a justification of every part of the research question. Not so much just proof of progress in general, but proof of progress within that context, which now that it's been told to me seems pretty obvious. But I was mainly just focusing on getting everything in one place with that last draft. So 2 more weeks, go for the second draft. Everything needs to be reorientated around that. Now I'm thinking right off the top of my head, because I don't have my notes with me, I'm in Perth, incidentally, visiting some friends over here and also catching up with some friends from France, and while I'm here. So, and working remotely, obviously. So, off the top of my head, the main things that need to be focused on. I need to elaborate on my definitions. I need to give why I'm using, discuss different definitions of extremism and why I'm using Berger's version, which should be fairly straightforward. I've already done that work, though I will have to justify it on an academic level. Then there's the question of defining AI, which is, well, just as slippery, probably. Defining extremism is certainly no joke. So, from there, I can also remove quite a lot of the problem statement that I was using as context up front, which again, perfectly fine. That was more for the proposal necessarily than the confirmation. So, from there, once having explained what AI is, we can look into the AI ethics of the thing to give that context. And then it's going to be a matter of going through all of the literature and really unpacking how each of those studies is relevant to the research question, focusing on the research question rather than the literature itself. So that all makes sense, and that should be fine. Gives me a little bit more depth of analysis, which is what I like to do anyway, so that's good. It will help get the creative parts of my brain churning instead of just the functional, as it was with the first draft, just putting everything in one space. So yeah, we are on track. We're doing pretty well. 2 more weeks a week and a half now, to get that second draft done, have another chat with Matteo around that, and then we can start on polish. So feeling good. Feeling pretty good about the whole thing. Excited to get stuck into data collection. That's always the most interesting part, I assume, in any case. Write everything up in analysis is all well and good, but data collection is where the fun is. Certainly has been in previous research I've done. And in particular, the first stage of the methodology, which will be interviews. Excuse me. I've also been sick. Good stuff. Just a 1 week cold, as far as I can tell. I've got my flu vax this year, which has paid off once again. Can't really argue with the results of that. Interviews. That's going to serve a number of very useful purposes for me. And there's some questions that surround the methodology there. So interviews with people experts in the fields, particularly around the use of AI in CVE or counter-extremism spaces as they're currently used, how they're currently governed, and in particular how, and as an addition, how people think they should be governed, or imagine an ideal governance framework for these things. Now, I'm not necessarily expecting those experts, to be able to give me a perfect framework. They wouldn't need me otherwise, would they? But the reasoning for that is that there's always a reason why it hasn't already been done. Put it like that. I tend to find this with ethics a lot. If there's an obvious improvement, if there's an obvious way of doing things better, then, for example, in the case of CVE, my own initial research revealed that there is no globalized standard for what extremism is, or for what hate speech is, or anything like that, partly because of the international boundaries these services cross over, social media, but partly because there simply has not been that level of communication yet between the platforms, and there's no incentive to do so yet. So, the obvious thing to do is to come up with a standard, make it universalizable, and enforce it accordingly. So why hasn't it happened? And when you ask the question, what does an ideal framework for ethics look like for the use of AI in this space, people will generally, rather than listing off actual solutions, they'll start listing off problems. We need to navigate X, Y, and Z in order to get anywhere better. And that is exactly what I need. So the funny thing is that if you ask for barriers, people tend to lock up a little bit. But if you ask for solutions, people tend to give you barriers. So that's my expectation. We're also going to deploy a couple of research methods, or at least we're exploring the options to deploy a couple of research methods here with those interviews. One is called scenario-based research. So this is an established research method where the concern is that if I ask them, the experts, what should a perfect ethical framework look like, or how should AI be governed in this context, they won't be able to tell me, or they'll give me a sanitized answer about how they should behave as opposed to how they actually will behave. So, and then Matteo raised this concern particularly because he's thinking, you're going to be being interviewed by an ethicist in this context to come up with an ethical framework, and that tends to put people on their best behavior, which is absolutely a thing. So rather than grill them on the spot, and we'd give them all the questions in advance anyway, but we could also give them a scenario in advance and get them to contemplate it and then unpack that during the interview, which allows them to establish their thoughts in a more structured way in advance. So that's good. The other method we want to sort of deploy, well, I'm looking at deploying, is one suggested by a mentor of mine. Hey Ange, hope you're doing well. Is called the Delphi technique. And this is ultimately, I know by a lot of different names, but it essentially comes down to sort of a participatory design approach, which is you have your first set of interviews with these people, these experts, but then you revisit those same experts at later stages as the response to their feedback is incorporated into your thesis. All right, so for me, that would be, hey, up front, let's get a baseline. What's the current governance of AI and CVE? What should it be? Then I go away and work on it. And then I would come back to those same experts and give them an opportunity to review what I developed, maybe 2 or 3 times over the course of the project, incorporating their prior feedback. And the value of that is pretty self-evident. It's you get their insight and their input throughout the process. So they get an opportunity to input into it. They get their skills and expertise recognized, and I get a point of critical review. In particular, I get a point of critical review from people who are very, very, very pragmatic. I'm also thinking about setting up a human rights reference group in order to poke holes and stress test the framework to make sure it can't be abused, or at least minimal abuse. But that's a principled stance. What I'd also like is for a group who are very pragmatic to think about how it will actually be used in practice and whether it will be used in practice, because, as we all know, an ethical framework, if it's made a little too onerous, tends to just get ignored. So that's where we're at. Feeling very happy about all of that, feeling very enthusiastic about getting out and doing it. I do good interview work. I'm very excited to get out there and really chew the fat with experts about this space. I've already started networking, so that'll put me in good stead, but actually formally sitting down with people in these spaces and hashing it out will give us a really nice baseline. Very excited about that as well, because as far as I'm aware, there's no real governance baseline or capture of where things are at in this space specifically, despite the fact that we know that technology is being used for this work. So, be exciting. Might be publishable in and of its own right, actually, but we'll see. Anyway, getting ahead of myself in that regard. So that's it. Week 28. Keeping on. I'll have another one for you next week. I'm going to get back in the saddle with these now that I've got my thoughts lined up, and approaching confirmation on the 23rd of September. Very excited.